The Gillard government finally has the numbers in the lower house for poker machine reform. The breakthrough came yesterday when independent MP Andrew Wilkie agreed to legislation which will see all machines fitted with technology which will allow a future government to flick the switch to mandatory pre-commitment. But there will be a battle in the Senate where the Greens and Parliament's original anti-Pokies crusader Nick Xenophon says they won't pass this bill as it stands. Senator Xenophon is in our Parliament House studios. Senator, welcome back to breakfast.
Good morning, Fran.
What's wrong with this legislation?
Well, it's wrong at a whole range of levels. Firstly, this was part of a deal that was ripped up by the Prime Minister on January the 21st. She had agreed with Andrew Wilkie in order to get into government to ensure that there would be mandatory pre-commitment as recommended by the Productivity Commission by next year, effectively. And to have legislation passed in this current sitting of Parliament. The government ripped that up as a result of, I think, bowing into pressure from the Pokies lobby. And what the government is now doing is saying we will make machines mandatory pre-commitment ready, in other words, having that capacity by at some stage in the future, new machines by the end of next year. What makes me very suspicious about this deal is, firstly, all these measures won't come into force until after the next election. And if I were a betting man, and I'm not, I don't think the odds are too good for the Gillard government to be returned at this stage. And secondly, the government won't even look at having machines $1 bet ready. In other words, no more than $1 per spin, no more than $120 per hourly losses, as recommended by the Productivity Commission. Why won't they do that? And I think this is a bit of a smoke and mirrors trick by the government.
The government's always said it would oppose the $1 bet. It's never allowed that on the table. As you say, the Productivity did recommend $1 bets. It also said mandatory pre-commitment is a good idea. The government went with that. I mean, why would you think, and why would you say you're going to try and move this amendment with the support of others in the Senate when the government's never been on board with this?
Well, I think the government needs to explain why they haven't been on board with this.
Well, they say it's too expensive.
Well, that is just a load of nonsense from the government. I mean, the fact is their figures are incredibly rubbery. I sent off a cheque for $440 to get some FOI documents from the government, which hopefully I'll get soon. I mean, the fact is the government hasn't explained this. In other independent bodies that have looked at this have said that the cost would be in the order of $200 million. When you consider that problem gamblers lose $5 billion a year, a $200 million cost over several years is minuscule, and it's about making the machines much safer. And Fran, 2 years ago, the Victorian government changed machines from $10 maximum bet per spin to just $5, and that was done with a minimum of fuss without any complaints from the industry. OK, bird in the hand and all that. Andrew Wilkie said he reluctantly will support these reforms. They're a shadow of what was agreed to after the 2010 election. It's not a great solution, he says, but it's the best we can get. Do you accept that Andrew Wilkie should support this, or do you think he should have held out? Look, this was a very tough call for Andrew. Andrew's behaved honourably at all times. He did the best that he thought he could do, given his negotiations. Well, I can't support these reforms in their current form, and at the end of the day, this is giving perhaps false hope to some problem gamblers. I think I get Andrew's point that this might be a precedent for federal intervention in terms of poker machine reform, but we know that constitutionally the Commonwealth clearly has the powers to intervene on this. Look, I think a lot will happen in the next 2 or 3 months. Let's wait and see. But I think that the government is going through the motions of saying they're supporting reform, but they don't have their heart in this at all. OK, but in a sense, what right have you to sink this when people like Andrew Wilkie, who've been committed to this for a long time, say it's better than nothing? Tim Costello, who chairs the Church's Gambling Task Force, says this legislation should be supported because the task force believes it's better than nothing. Look, I think there are mixed views on the Church's Task Force in relation to this. The concern I have is this, that the government is going to put up a reform that my concern is that it won't go anywhere. We'll have a trial in the ACT, which may or may not be robust because Queanbeyan or New South Wales may not provide figures, which will make the trial a bit of a nonsense. Secondly, the aspect of this is that the simpler reform, the dollar bets, which was the key and primary recommendation of the Productivity Commission, isn't being even looked at by the government. We need to, hold them. We need to find out why they won't. And I guess the other big issue is that in terms of mandatory pre-commitment, it isn't going anywhere. The most we'll get is at some indeterminate time in the future the possibility that machines might be ready for mandatory pre-commitment. Well, it's not that vague, is it? It's 2016, isn't it? That they will be ready. State-linked pre-commitment and dynamic warnings and cost of displays. Sure. Well, the problem, what we need to find out during the Senate committee process is how effective this will be, whether it is something that can be switched on at a flick of a switch, as the government says, because the initial exposure drafts of this bill didn't actually say that. It was very vague, and I think we need to hold the government to account. I guess, Fran, I'm quite sceptical in terms of the government's intentions on this. I'm willing to work constructively on this. Andrew Wilkie made a very tough call. I would have made a different call, but Andrew, the joke with Andrew is, that I make with him is he's got 225 colleagues here. I'm the only one that will actively campaign for his re-election next time round.
And just to clarify your position then, you're prepared to work to make this better, but what's your bottom line? If the government doesn't agree when it gets to the Senate to change this bill to include $1 bets and to have an absolute starting date for a switch all the machines to mandatory pre-commitment, you won't support it?
Well, at this stage, I can't see how I can, and that's why I think there's a lot of things that'll happen in the next few months. But we need to hold the government to account.
But if that's your bottom line, the government's not going to agree to that, is it? This is sunk.
Well, it's not necessarily. I mean, it depends on what the Greens will do. But I've been working closely with Richard Di Natale, the Greens gambling spokesperson, on this. I think that there's a lot more in this before the final votes occur. But the government really needs to be condemned for ripping up what was a written agreement between the Prime Minister and Andrew Wilkie, and it was ripped up on January the 21st, and it was ripped up because the government had a smugness about them, thinking that they had Peter Slipper in the bag.
Do you think the Gillard government ever really intended to bring this legislation into the Parliament for mandatory pre-commitment if it had a hope of passing?
I guess in hindsight, I think there were some warning signs there. I was with Andrew on the 2nd of September 2010. He used my office as a base when he was negotiating with the government. His first port of call was to say, let's have $1 bets, clear, simple, I believe cheaper to implement, but the government wouldn't come at that, so mandatory pre-commitment was a second best option. But I think there was a lot of sound and fury on the part of the government, but when the crunch came, they weren't prepared to follow this through.
And Andrew Wilkie said something like, that's if all the machines are converted and are ready to go, then it would just take a government of good heart. Now, as you say, all the polls suggest we'll have a change of government. There'll be a coalition government in by the time 2016 rolls around. The coalition shows no sign of supporting these changes. But if the machines are ready to go, you're a lot closer to being better equipped if moral pressure comes on the coalition on this, aren't you?
Sure, although I think there is just so much resistance to mandatory pre-commitment when a better option will be $1 bets. And the government hasn't explained why technologically that isn't as feasible. I guess I'll have to see the documents that I've requested through FOI and we'll go from there.
And just on another issue, and another reform of the government which has been implemented is the carbon tax. You describe it as pretty awful policy. You won't stand in the way, you've said, of an Abbott government repealing that tax. But if the Abbott government repeals the tax, the country's left then with what would be the Abbott government's policy of direct action, which you've described as clunky and economic inefficient. So what is your position here?
Well, my position has been consistent all along. I don't support the government scheme for a whole range of reasons. It is a massive amount of revenue churn and revenue burn, incredibly inefficient. When Malcolm Turnbull was opposition leader, we jointly commissioned, the coalition, myself commissioned Frontier Economics to come up with an alternative model, robustly modelled by the same modellers as that Treasury used for the CPRS, the earlier scheme.
But that's not in anyone's policy currently.
Well, I think it's been on the radar. I mean, people such as Andrew Robb had a very close look at it, and I thought he seemed to be quite impressed with it, as did many others in the coalition. All I'm saying is that if you're going to get rid of the carbon tax and the government's carbon pricing scheme, look at smarter, cheaper, more efficient alternatives that make good economic sense and good environmental sense as well. And so my support would obviously be conditional, but I'd like to think I can sit down with the coalition. But you're making a heroic assumption, Fran. Number one, that I'll be re-elected, and two, that I'll be in a balance of power situation. Fair cop.
Independent Senator Nick Xenophon, thanks very much for joining us.
Pleasure, Fran.
Independent Senator in South Australia, Nick Xenophon. It's 18 minutes to 8.